This is episode 641 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, it's something that has been reported by the media, Wally, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't emphasize it significantly here. A second assassination attempt has been thwarted, this one without the president being injured. But over the weekend, a man named Ryan Routh was found to be basically pointing a rifle out of some bushes at a Trump golf course down in Florida. Thankfully, no shots were fired that I know of against the president. Nothing directly happened to President Trump, but definitely an indicator of just how polarizing Donald Trump is and the continued threats that have been made against him as he runs to be president once again of the United States.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Paul. And then the other issue is the president likes to get around. He loves these events that he does, live events. He likes to get out and play golf. And, a golf course probably isn't the easiest thing to contain, but I would say that at least from an outcome point of view, if not from the details of how this happened, maybe went a little bit better, and that it seemed like the Secret Service maybe did a little bit better job. But a rifle barrel pointing through the bushes, that's a pretty good indication that there's a problem, and thank goodness they picked up on that. So he will live to continue to run for president again.
Yeah, and I did listen to a story about this that said that because he is not currently the president, Trump is not protected at the same level. For example, if Biden were to be playing at the same golf course, yes, he is still the president of the United States.
He'd be playing at the par 3 course, but anyway.
Yeah, the course would be shut down entirely, and anybody else around that would be eliminated. They wouldn't be allowed to be there. I don't know how aggressive that would be and exactly what parameters the Secret Service would work under, but I'm told that the security level for former president versus sitting president is different. Of course, this highlights kind of the fact that the Secret Service is a government entity, because there was no question long before the first assassination attempt that Donald Trump has a way of raising hackles and having people hate him. Everybody, including the mainstream media, opponents on the Democratic side of the aisle, he definitely is more of a lightning rod than I think any president or presidential candidate we've seen in certainly either of our lifetimes. And it's in a market-driven kind of world. I think Donald Trump would be worthy of far more protection than whether you're talking about the current president or the current candidate on the Democratic side. But that's not necessarily the way these government agencies see things.
Yes, that is a good point. And then, just as you were raising that issue, he is possibly the most polarizing. And I would have to say that the second most polarizing president in my lifetime, and again, I will explain why, is probably Ronald Reagan. And here's the thing: it could have been Obama if the news media would have been a little bit more balanced in their reporting. But boy, I used to hear a lot of bad stuff about Ronald Reagan back in the day on the news about all of the attributes that were attributed to him. None of them good. And interestingly enough, a very sad day, but it worked out well in the end, in that he lived. Also, the Gipper received he was involved in a circumstance where somebody tried to assassinate him as well, and got a lot closer than actually, from causing death than Trump did. We're not grading this on scales of gray, and man, I hope the president makes it. The former president makes it to election day, and your point is right. Yeah, he may be. A little more security might be justified now. How many times you get, after 12, it's like the government. Once this has happened for 5 years, then we'll talk about it. But no, I think a little more security may be called for, and not that Trump's going to listen to me, but maybe just be a little more careful here between now and November.
Well, after the first attempt, which I believe they diverted Secret Service resources for Jill Biden, not that anybody, not, nobody should be targeted in this way, just to be clear. But I don't think anybody truly cares about Jill Biden from a this is going to change the world kind of perspective, or whatever goes through these crazy people's minds as they commit to an assassination attempt. President Trump is clearly, somebody that drives people crazy. Sometimes he drives them crazy for reasons that are hard to understand, even for his supporters. But regardless, he does have a way of bringing out the crazy in certain people. So I would, if I was him, have my own security to supplement or coordinate with the Secret Service. I'm not sure how viable that is, but he's certainly high profile and fortunately wealthy enough that he could do that. And kudos to the Secret Service, though, for thwarting this particular threat. But it's something that is clearly an issue, and I don't think it's going away until at least after the election. If he were to be elected president, then boy, I would be doubling and tripling up on my security detail, because I think that is something to be very concerned about if I were President Trump, newly elected once again. But we'll know more about that in November. And speaking of November and who the next president is, it does not appear that Donald Trump is likely to win New Mexico, according to I think it's safe to say that Brian Sanderoff is by far and away the most respected and most accurate pollster in New Mexico. And his first round of polling came out over the weekend, specifically relating to the presidential race, but we also have polling data on the U.S. Senate race. But here we go when it comes to some of the top line information. As a preface, when Biden was still in the race, but after kind of the media had latched on for those couple of weeks, acknowledging his mental faculties and the shortcomings thereof, and just kind of his lack of energy and lack of efficacy as an individual, as a candidate, let alone as president of the United States. I think New Mexico had come into play simply because Democrats, those low propensity voters might not have showed up in the numbers that Joe Biden needed. Kamala Harris certainly energized the Democrat base, and one could argue that she and her biography, if not her stances on the issues, which have been few and far between, but her biography and who she is has reinvigorated the Democrat base and independent voters. But currently, as Sanderoff has it, Harris is 49%, 39% for Trump, undecided at 7%, and other candidates at 5%. Now, RFK will indeed be on the ballot this fall. He is not being removed from New Mexico ballots. 5%, it does appear that some number of voters are still inclined to vote for RFK, even though he has indeed endorsed Donald J. Trump. But Any thoughts on this polling data, Wally?
Well, New Mexico is a tough place for Republicans in recent and really not so recent memory. And as things continue to go along, we have only we have no statewide elected officials, and so this would continue that. And then the other thing that this does is, we have a statewide race in Domenici versus Heinrich, and it doesn't look, if these numbers are accurate, it doesn't look like there will be any even opportunity for some Republican coattails, or I don't even know if I would call it that, some synergy between candidates, between Trump and Domenici, and I think that's uh, hopefully would happen, but that's probably what's going to be necessary for that race as well.
Yeah, a few of the kind of more in-depth details. Again, according to Brian Sanderoff, uh, when it comes to men, Trump narrowly uh, wins 46-44. Women, though, vote overwhelmingly for Harris, and I don't, I don't know that that would be much different from Biden. Uh, Women, by and large, at least in this state, are much more inclined towards the Democratic side of things. Now, you and I, Wally, we kind of defy the education parameters, whereas Trump wins the high school diploma only 49-38. Some college is evenly split 44-44, but college graduates 60-30 to Kamala Harris, and graduate degrees 67-26. Uh, Kamala Harris overwhelmingly wins Democrats 86-7. Uh, Republicans, though, even more, 88% as a percentage go for Trump to 4% for Harris. So the rumors that Donald Trump is losing lots of Republicans who don't like him personally, or they're, the Dick Cheney wing of the Republican Party, at least in New Mexico, looms large, is seemingly inaccurate. It's just obviously Republicans are a much smaller group in New Mexico, and then independents, not surprisingly, given those two data points, 45-23. So, uh, pretty standard fare, quite honestly. So the idea that New Mexico's in play in this election, I think, is a little bit far fetched when it comes to Donald Trump. And we've seen that. We've seen some ads, at least on the limited amount of TV I watch, which basically amounts to football games. You get a few Kamala Harris ads, but we're not being deluged by advertisements, and I haven't seen anything from President Trump on my television screen. Now, when it comes to Nella Domenici and Martin Heinrich, 50% for Heinrich, 38% for Nella Domenici, 9% undecided, 4% for neither, which, if nothing else, highlights the fact that in state after state, Donald Trump is outpolling his fellow Republicans. And Nella Domenici has attempted to distance herself, not just from Trump, but also to play an even more moderate kind of policy position on abortion than even Trump. Trump has basically said it's a state issue. Nella's been even more kind of bleeding over into the pro-choice side of things. Uh, Again, I think the issue is baked into the cake. If you have an R by your name, you're going to be seen and labeled as a radical anti-choice, anti-abortion person, and that is going to uh, drive a certain number of those pro-choice voters. But that obviously is not a particularly advantageous issue for Republicans at large. But Domenici slightly trails Donald Trump, at least according to Sanderoff's initial polling here.
Yeah, and that is a very interesting piece of the details, Paul. That's the case. So, what does this all mean? It's the 16th of September. Early voting starts. It's not that not that long, a month and a half until that happens in New Mexico. Right now, I talked to a lot of business people. I've looked at a lot of numbers. I think maybe we have skirted the recession, at least for this for the next several months. If that's true, and gasoline prices are down, it's not like everyone's totally happy with the economy, but those things tend to favor the incumbent of at every level. And so right now, things are looking. If you're an R, maybe a little bit depressing here in New Mexico, but hope springs eternal, and a month and a half is an eternity in politics, and we'll have to see. And by the way, polls are not votes. Votes are votes. So that's the other thing that we have to deal with. But to his credit, Sanderoff is not usually way off. He has a pretty darn good track record.
Yeah, and ultimately, those undecided and neither, they're either going to not vote or they will vote for one or the other candidates. Uh, and people do change their minds. But, right now, it is still early relative to even the beginning of in person early voting and absentee voting. So, uh, there's definitely time for a shift in some of these. But a Republican has not won the president, the electoral college here in New Mexico. So the presidential vote in New Mexico since 2004 when Bush narrowly won. And if you're a betting person, you're saying it's unlikely that Trump manages to pull it out. I would have gladly taken some odds on that when Biden was still in the race, but that is certainly one of the things that Democrats successfully did by swapping him for her very late in the game.
Yeah, and Paul, before Biden's personal issues and his weaknesses, his mental capacity became such an issue, you'd have to say that Kamala Harris was the least popular big time candidate politician in the country, but she proved to be way more popular than Biden given his weakened condition, and the D's certainly rallied around her. They before that there over the last many years, there's been a lot of concerns about her and her policy, her history, her capabilities, but that all went out the window, and the Democrats have really united around Kamala, and they were really scared with Biden still in there. So
Yeah,
it's amazing how quickly things can change.
absolutely. Um, so moving on, we have a new education secretary, new PED secretary. At least she has been put forth by Michelle Lujan Grisham, Mariana Padilla. This is definitely in the category of MLG loyalists. She was the Congresswoman Lujan Grisham when she was in Congress, her state director for 6 years. She replaces Arsenio Romero, who served for just 18 months. This is the fifth PED secretary. She was an elementary school teacher at APS. She's been, the secretary of the early childhood department, newly formed agency. Nothing quite as exciting in government world as getting to be the first head of a newly minted government agency. I thought the Albuquerque Journal editorial about this, I forget which day it was, may have been Sunday, may have been Saturday, but they really emphasized that the culture of accountability needs to be front and center for Padilla. Now, this is unlike Rob Black, the new economic development secretary, and some of the more recent decisions that have been made by this governor. This is a friend of Michelle. This is somebody who is going to very much align herself with the governor. So unless the governor has had a fairly significant change of heart. Now, the difference between PED and economic development is that you can, especially when you're in a position where you have so much money flowing into the state's coffers through the oil and gas industry, you can do everything like this. It's your world. You can satisfy all the special interest groups and more with those tax dollars. You can cut taxes. You can move possibly. It's not a guarantee, especially as a lame duck. If she'd named Rod Black as economic development secretary on day one, with all the momentum of her first election, I would have said that's a game changer right there. As the last 2 years guy, he's going to have much more of an uphill battle. And Padilla, though, uh, it's going to be hard to see how she moves the needle on New Mexico's education system, even if she enacts the policies that we would like to see. Day one, she comes in with school choice or something really off the wall for at least a Democrat like Michelle Lujan Grisham, who's beholden to the unions. She's going to face significant opposition in that effort, both from the unions who support the governor, but also Democrats in the legislature. So I maybe she can move the needle on the margins a little bit, and we won't see it until 3, 4, 5 years when the governor's a distant memory as the current governor. But I really question whether that will even be the case. I just don't see the governor changing her heart and being willing to stick her finger in the eye of the teachers unions at this point.
Yeah, and then Paul, we're now down to lame duck time. We're in the last 2 years, and then 2 more legislative sessions. The 60-day one coming up this coming January, and so from if there's going to be any legislation regarding education, it's in all likelihood going to happen this next session. But guess what? What are the odds of that? I'd say they're pretty low. And the reason I'd say that is very little talk about any, legislative activity for that. Whereas, Rob Black, there's some things that you can do administratively that might help. And as you say, still a lot of money in Santa Fe. So if there's a program, even if you might say for the short term, it's a Band-Aid or not worth it as a big strategic endeavor, guess what? You've got some money to try some things if he can convince people to do that. Education, not so much. And again, I just think after the upcoming 60-day session, as opposed to in the federal system where our president is very lame duck their last couple of years, I think, your last basically year and 10 months with only a 30-day legislative session in between you and the end of your career, lame duckness comes a lot earlier and a lot harder than it even does at the federal level.
Yeah, no doubt. So we'll see if Padilla is out there praising, or pushing reform. We'll be happy to praise her for those efforts. And one of the things that there may be a philosophical shift on is that I understand she maybe is a little less doctrinaire in her approach to the 4 versus 5 day school week. If the governor were to just decide, okay, we're going to go ahead and just let the districts do what they choose to do, as opposed to continuing litigation and efforts to kind of browbeat them and bully them into taking on the 5 day school week. That would be an easy and relatively low cost way to put an olive branch out there that this new PED secretary has a bit of a change of heart, and also just abandoning their whole food growing on campus regulatory approach and the new mandates on that would be another positive. So that was, I believe, still in the process. There had not been a final reconciliation of that, of course, with all the turnover and all the kind of up and down at PED, that may have just kind of gotten put on hold,
which would be a brilliant outcome
a
for all
starting point. Yeah.
concerned. Yes, and then with regard to the 4 day school week, Paul, I'm not sure the details about where any lawsuits and all of that is, but that would be a great thing in between the day after Christmas and New Year's for them to just kind of drop and quietly go about their business, not talk about that anymore, and maybe work on some things that are more important. Because, the bitter irony is that a lot of those schools that have those 4 day school weeks are doing a heck of a lot better than those that have five. But the uh, the qualifications that they put on having to have four were like, oh my goodness, if the whole state would do that, we'd probably be close to number one or two in the nation. So there was a way for them to keep that 4 day school week, but boy, it was a harsh way indeed relative to how the rest of the state's education system is evaluated and what they have to put up with.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Uh, Speaking of the Albuquerque Journal, on Sunday, I co-authored a piece. I don't co-author many, but with Doug Peterson, who runs Peterson Properties and has been a guest on this show. Somebody who has a huge stake in what happens downtown. Uh, Pretty straightforward, but we essentially talked about the proposals by Mayor Keller for a tax increment development district, or TIF, for downtown, as well as a business improvement district. We describe briefly what those are. A TIF is essentially a way that you can kind of trap revenues in a favored area while it sucks revenues away from and government services away from the non-favored areas, which would be the rest of Albuquerque. The bid is a self-imposed tax on property owners downtown, and you can fund certain services, but unfortunately, at least as we've seen here in Albuquerque, bids cannot be used to, or are not used to fund additional police officers. And that might be an interesting, different conversation if you could get public, property owners in a given area to put up additional money to fund police services. Of course, that you're really creates questions as to what is government doing with all the money it already has, and how legitimate is this when you can tax yourself and pay for your own policing services. But regardless, we highlight the issue that crime remains the number one problem, not just downtown, but in many areas of our city. And we also note that it would be wonderful, it would be lovely if the governor and the legislature, perhaps with Rob Black, decided to make economic development, broadly speaking, a very high priority for the city. Because, I can say with great authority on the matter, Wally, that the downtown marketplace, when you're talking about property owners and office spaces, it not just in Albuquerque, but it's not the same in any city in the country. Since COVID, as a lot of people are working remotely, they're not in their office space 5 days a week, and the level of occupancy is just not what it once was. And we know Albuquerque struggled before COVID. It struggles even more mightily now. And if we were to have a concerted effort in Santa Fe to make New Mexico a more attractive place to do business, and that involved new downtown office spaces, preferably with crime under control as well down there, that would change the game. So it's really kind of a two-pronged argument, or two-pronged approach, that you got to address crime. That's not going to happen with either the policies outlined by the mayor, and then you've got to get more offices occupied and more of a dynamic downtown environment. So do those two things, and that will solve your problems, not more taxes and more kind of subsidies for downtown.
Yes, Paul, and I do find it fascinating that that somehow the businesses are always to blame for this. It's like so that somehow they are to blame that there's crime in these areas, so they need to pay more to get decent policing. And if you're a business, and this is not a this is in no way an anti-police, but when you don't have that many police in a place like Albuquerque, does more money even help? Would they be better off just paying for more private security if that's something that they need? A privatized approach to things. But yes, this whole issue is very, they've gotten themselves in a very dangerous place, and that is, they blame the victims a lot. There's a lot of that, and forcing them to pay more to get police protection is a lot of blaming the victim, and we're seeing this more and more across the city. They complain that grocery stores and pharmacies go out of business, and you have food and drug islands where there's no access to service, but they never ask themselves why that is. So if you had a place with many tens of thousands of people close to your grocery store, and you could manage to operate it without your own private security force, and even then have people stealing from you left and right. I bet somebody would want to open a store there, but that does not seem to be like where we start. We always start with it's almost like education, more money and fewer details, and somehow that's going to help.
Absolutely. The housing market and housing policy have become hot topics, not just here in New Mexico, but nationwide. Kamala Harris, of course, has outlined $25,000 subsidy payments for first-time home buyers. There's been a lot of discussion about home values, home prices, the supply and demand for homes. And aside from interest rates, which of course are multifaceted and complicated, but you can argue certainly that the interest rates rose dramatically as a partial response to the federal debt, which of course that's a huge problem that we could and probably should do another episode on the out of control federal debt in Washington. But here are just a few policies relating to housing that are created by government. And I don't know that government can actually solve all of these or any of these without just, for example, repealing the gross receipts tax as a gross receipts tax and what it does. But here we'll just run through a few that I posted up on heirsoфenchantment.com. The eviction moratorium during COVID-19, that put a huge issue into the housing market where people who, say you're maybe a little old lady and you're 65 or 70 years old and you own an apartment and that's the only income you have aside from Social Security. Well, suddenly you have a tenant who has no incentive to pay their rent, and there goes your income. And there's all kinds of problems with that. So the eviction moratorium, something not often talked about at this point because it has been lifted, but that caused a huge issue in the housing markets. Inflation, broadly speaking, not just interest rates, but the cost of materials. New so-called green regulations on the construction of homes and apartments, limits on land use via zoning and open space rules. And my neighborhood on the west side, we saw the creation of a open space area on the West Mesa, I guess you'd call it. Nobody talks about the Northwest Mesa, but it's just north of St. Pius High School, and there was a threat, if you will, that there was going to be homes built there, and the locals decided to put some heat on the mayor, and he folded like a cheap suit and went ahead and embraced the open space. It's been sitting empty, vacant for 3.5 years now, but that's the kind of thing that's done oftentimes. Zoning as a general tendency, rule that has issues. The crime issue, if you don't stop crime in your downtown area and some of your other established areas, people aren't going to want to live there. And you create these kind of empty zones throughout the city where perfectly good housing is not being occupied because of the crime situation, or at least the price drops tremendously. And then you have the gross receipts tax, which impacts the cost of new housing uh, in general. So those are some of the highlights or lowlights of government policy as it pertains to housing. Now, will the initiatives pursued at the federal level or the state level or the local level make a difference? These are open questions, but not particularly optimistic. I think they need to solve the problems they're already creating.
Yeah, Paul, because a lot of the problems at the federal level, if interest rates come down, that's a good thing. But guess what? As interest rates come down, sometimes housing prices go up. These are market forces, and it's amazing how often they'll just look at one side of a market force. They're like, well, wouldn't it be good if rents were lower? It's like, yeah, let's put in rent control. Let's keep rents lower. And, there's a paraphrasing the famous economic saying that rent control can do as much to damage a city as bombing during war. And so it sounds good. Some things sound good until you consider the other side. But this is a largely a government created problem. And it's interesting if the government isn't looking at the things that they're doing to raise the price of housing and therefore reducing the supply. Putting some band-aids on it on the back end, will it make things better? Possibly for some select groups that get it, but it's not getting at the underlying cause and having things go forward. And then, as we will hear in the future, knowing how the podcasts are done serially, a lot of housing is not going in on the southwest part of Albuquerque where there is land. It's going to places like Rio Rancho and Las Lunas, where some of these underlying issues are not nearly as bad.
Yeah, we'll see. Housing is definitely one of many challenging areas now that government has decided to really engage in it. Real quick, the University of New Mexico, their conference recently lost 4 members, and this is really an existential issue for UNM and their athletics program. Now, we could say, as a principled kind of libertarian argument, that college sports are not rightfully, they don't belong in a university setting, and that's a very simple and straightforward approach. And I don't begrudge anybody for having that perspective, but
it won't be actionable anytime soon.
Yeah.
It may be at New Mexico, by the way, but for most of the country, not.
Yeah, we've got these programs here, and I would argue that when you talk to sports fans, especially those who may not be super politically engaged, there's a reason that New Mexico was not among the group chosen, the Boise State, San Diego State, Colorado State, and Fresno State, that were chosen to leave to go to the formerly Pac-10, Pac-12, Pac-2, now Pac-6, Pacific Athletic Conference, I believe is their official name. But, it does have partially to do with their football strength and attendance. But University of New Mexico, like any entity of its sort here, suffers from, among other things, but certainly high on the list is a lack of a corporate community and funding community, because just like your Little League program, but on a different level, Sandia National Lab, while it's a great asset in many ways to our community, and even while the oil and gas industry are huge assets, they're not the same as a major Fortune 500 corporation or multiple Fortune 500 corporations, and the people who work for them and take paychecks from them, in the support they give for those community run events, and it could be the art museum, it could be anything else. We just don't have that kind of situation here in New Mexico, and it's going to put University of New Mexico, NMSU, but also your local little league and your theater in a tougher position than they would be in a lot of other states because of the more robust, diversified economy.
Yeah, and then Paul, just a little bit, and I'm not going to argue about whether sports belongs in college as they do. And the argument over the years has been, well, are they professionals or not? Well, the athletes weren't professionals historically, but these were big businesses for the colleges involved. And in New Mexico, we were trying to play in a in frankly against competitors nationally that put a lot more money and a lot more effort into it. Well, then we had the all of the changes in college athletics, the transfer portal, and the ability to pay players for their image, likeness, etc. It is now a business with a big payroll as well. And so, what does that mean for a place like New Mexico? Um, Pay more or continue to be at the margins and kicked out of conferences. It's interesting. This is not the first. We've been doing this a long time. It's interesting how the Mountain West Conference and the WAC kind of switched teams a number of years back. And there was a time where, a lot of schools, Arizona State, went from the WAC to the Pac-10 or the Pac-8 or whatever they were back then. But if you don't find a home, you are going to be you could be in a world of hurt. And so, will New Mexico be able to find a home in the recreation of the pack, or are they going to have to find some lesser conference to go into, perhaps the WAC or some other? These are all very interesting questions, but they have a lot of I don't know, a lot of peril. Whatever you do, it's going to be a tough call. It's probably going to cost a lot of money, and then there's no guarantee it's going to work. Again, particularly for this second and third tier and beyond schools. The big schools, they're the ones that are being paid to come into some of these conferences. Their exit fees are being taken care of. Right now, where we are in particularly in football in the state of New Mexico with our two Division I programs, we're certainly quite a distance away from that point of view.
Yeah, and just like Arizona as a state, once upon a time was joined at the hip with the state of New Mexico. The sports teams in Arizona have been able to, because they're funded differently. They have a more diversified economic situation in the state of Arizona. They have been able to succeed in ways that we have not had that level of success. Not, college football is one thing, but college basketball for sure. Arizona Wildcats are one of the top teams in all of college basketball. So if you're not interested in college sports, you can fast forward through that segment. Anyway, Senator Martin.
And Paul, can I make one real quick point on that? The other issue is, okay, colleges have a problem with sports places, but colleges themselves are getting into very tough strategic area where their tuition keeps going up and up and up. Their costs keep going up and up and up. Places like New Mexico, with all of our oil money being dumped into that's mitigating that a little bit. But it's the value and quality of education that is being received and the majors that people take in college and who they attract as students. These are all very big issues as well. So, the one thing that is unfortunate about the sports aspect is I do think it takes away a lot of the focus from the underlying reason that there is a college in the first place. So,
absolutely, yeah. Well, that goes without saying. Certainly, New Mexico spends a lot on college, and of course free college, so to speak. Free college is an added expense that we can only afford thanks to the oil and gas revenue that we bring in. I noticed in a recent Albuquerque Journal Business Outlook story that Martin Heinrich talked openly about an Inflation Reduction Act 2.0. Now, it is worth noting that this legislation has been acknowledged even by President Biden, that it was really a climate change bill. Well, if you said those magic words to Martin Heinrich, that's where he doesn't, care about inflation reduction. He cares about one thing, and it is climate change and so-called green policies. And of course, he supports dumping more of our tax dollars into said activities. The initial IRA will cost now an estimated $1.2 trillion, according to Goldman Sachs, 3 times what the Democrats have claimed. And of course, Martin Heinrich is there front and center. And he told the Albuquerque Journal he would like to see the stars align in Congress for another IRA, which he said the initial version was really a culmination of the last 16 years of legislating. So all the wish list items they hadn't gotten for 16 years, which happens to include Barack Obama's 8 years in office and nearly 4 years of the Biden administration. So if you can't get it during those times, then it's a pretty good indicator that these are not exactly the highest priorities, even in Washington, D.C., for his fellow Democrats in office. So, of course, we know what Heinrich is really all about. It is the climate change boondoggles that really drive that guy and his concerns. So we're just going to leave that there, but that's the reality of the situation. And really quick, the last thing, Wally and I both kind of raised our eyebrows at the op-ed from the higher ed secretary in last week's Albuquerque Journal. Gary Carruthers, who used to head up that university and was once upon a time a governor here in New Mexico, governor of New Mexico. He too raised his eyebrows in the form of a response opinion piece, saying a lot of the same things that we do about, the Board of Regents. Their role is to pick the new president, that they have been very diligent in their approach. He even cites the DEI statements, diversity, equity, and inclusion statements that the candidates have been putting forth, and that he really says, look, this is not something that the governor or her higher education secretary should be engaged in this process, that she should butt out, which I applaud Mr. Carruthers for saying that, and we'll just have to see how this whole process pans out, and whether the governor is able to get somebody that she aligns with, or whether they're able to find somebody at all, because it certainly seemed like, I believe Stephanie Rodriguez is her name, higher ed secretary, she had indicated that she was pretty happy with the interim person who was there, because of course they were checking several of the boxes that apparently the governor would like to see checked in that search. So with that, we will leave it there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.